Coming up with This Week in Computer Hardware, NVIDIA's new GTX 1660 Ti benchmarked. Is this the new 1060? More folding phones, USB 3.2, and a sweet new 212 from Cooler Master. All that more coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 506, recorded on February 28th, 2019. GTX 1660 Ti benchmarked and a Cooler Master. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Helm. Take back your email and your own data with Helm, a secure personal server that enables you to own your online identity. For a limited time, save $50 off the Helm personal server by visiting thehelm.com/twitch. And by Hover. Register a domain name and build your online brand with Hover. Visit hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twitch weekly show. The name is bringing you the most useful, most engaging, most delightful, most affordable, and occasionally most expensive computer hardware. We love the mobile, we love the laptops, and we especially love the gaming and the NAS boxes. We like all the little hardwares, don't we? Sebastian, are you out there?
I am here.
Do you love all the little hardware?
Yes. I do.
That sounds like a very qualified yes.
I was trying to figure out what you meant by all the little hardware, but
I have no
sure.
idea. You know,
all hardware, great and small.
Oh, I like that. That's even better. All hardware, great and small. We teased a lot about something that was released on Friday last week. You did the full review on PCPro.com. The unexpected but expected NVIDIA Geforce Gtx 1660 Ti, what you affectionately call mainstream touring.
Right.
Are you excited about this card?
Yeah, I mean, I have to temper my enthusiasm because I'm trying to be objective here. And honestly, as NVIDIA now has released 2 new GPUs this year, just since CES, we've now had the 379 price point, 349 price point, and now we've moved down to the 279 price point. So they're filling in the gaps. And as we progress through the year, I'm sure we're going to see the cards that dip down to around 200 and below, as they always do. And it's been a little bit longer this time because the 10 series cards, like the 1060, the 1070s of the world, the 1050 Ti's, all those, they've been around for a little while. Like the 10 series debuted in 2016. So they didn't really have to push too hard because AMD hasn't really released anything new in the same time span. And of course, this year AMD has the new Radeon 7, but that's at the very high end. So
sure.
What we're looking at here is just NVIDIA saying, you know, here is a product that essentially replaces the 1060, which is getting a little long in the tooth. And if you look at where the 1060 launched, it was at $249 for a 3 gigabyte model and $299 for the 6 gigabyte model. So this is right in between those two as far as pricing goes. But, you know, it has been almost 2 years now. So it's good to see a replacement. If this is, in fact, the replacement, we have yet to see if there's going to be something that's a little bit closer to the actual performance level of the 1060. But
Sure.
As you alluded to from the title, this is touring. This is not another Pascal card. Pascal was the architecture from those 10 series cards. Touring is the architecture of the RTX cards that have the real-time ray tracing support. But, surprise, there's no ray tracing in this card, which is why they're going with the GTX branding instead of RTX. And I think it was to avoid further confusion to go with an odd sort of a naming scheme with these and call them the 1600 series. So, you know, they could have gone with GTX 2060, but there's already an RTX 2060 on the market. So I'm not sure where they came up with 1660, but that's where we are.
I'm sure it involved a long, drawn-out, nasty, world-class fight. And there's probably some ornate justification for it, but I mean, it's an RTX minus the ray tracing, minus the DLSS, and 50% faster than a 1060. I mean, this to me sounds, I mean, one of the questions I asked you on Tech Thing when we talked about it earlier this week is, is the 1060 and the 1070 pretty much should be dead for most folks at this point.
Yeah, and in fact, depending on where you live, like we had been through a period of time where the 1070 was pretty much out of the retail channels here. And
Right.
It's back. I mean, at least for now, I'm seeing cards in like the 329 and up range where you can still buy a 1070. When those finally disappear, then the 1660 Ti will be the 1070 as far as performance goes, and it will be at a lower price point. So, I mean, right now we're kind of in that position where the old stuff is still in the chain, the new comes out. So if you look at it like that, like if the 1070s had stayed in the pipeline and it dropped to 279, that would be a great deal. The only real difference, and we talked about this before on Tech Thing, was the memory has dropped. If you're straight up comparing this to a 1070, because that's where the performance of the GPU itself is, well, this only has 6 gigabytes of memory versus 8 gigabytes of memory with the 1070. I mean, this is faster memory. This is GDDR6, and GDDR6 not only offers more speed, but is very overclockable. That was something that when the standard was introduced, Micron was talking about how much performance potential it had. So that's an advantage, and we could have a whole discussion about how much video RAM you actually need for a given resolution. At what point is 6 gigabytes no longer viable? Do we need 8 gigabytes? And of course, AMD would love to make the argument right now that you do need 8 gigabytes because that's what their cards provide in the sort of $200 price range. So, you can look at both sides of that, but.
Well, at this point, we know AMD is coming out with the new Navi-based cards, but probably not until late this year. They have their sort of fabulous Radeon 7 workstation card that also does gaming, the best Blender card you've ever seen. We've got the GTX 2080, 2070, and 2060. The 2060 being the sort of, if you're a 1440p gamer or you can't afford a more expensive RTX card, that's your choice. If you aren't particularly stirred by is it less than 5 games that do RTX right now, or you don't want to run RTX at 640 by 480, or you don't particularly care about it, I mean, this seems to be the card of choice. I don't, we didn't really expect the Radeon 7, I think, to come out at CES, but because I was about to say I don't expect any particular big news at low-end cards, at least till the end of the year from AMD.
No, and I think initially there was a lot of hope that it was going to be mid-2019. That's where we're expecting to see the new Ryzen processors for desktop. It's very possible they go on stage, around Computex timeframe, and they want to make a big splash, and they can introduce the new motherboard platform and processor, and then also say, by the way, here's the new Navi GPU, and it's going to start shipping in, whenever. But,
Right.
We've also heard rumors, like you said, late 2019. We're talking like October, November timeframe, possibly. So if that were the case, then NVIDIA can just kind of sit back and release a new GPU here and there and fill up every spot in the market and enjoy a very good year, which they need to do. I mean, they had, a bit of a decline, possibly due to some sort of crypto mining thing that may or may not have been happening. So AMD and NVIDIA both, I think they would love to be selling cards the way that they were, where it didn't matter what they had in the market. They were just gone everywhere.
Yeah, I think that probably hit NVIDIA harder than AMD, because it seemed like AMD released their new cards and then several thousand years later actually had more cards for the channel. It was, I remember we saw them for sale for several minutes, maybe in a couple days, and then we literally didn't see any of their cards for months at that point. Looking at this versus the GTX 2060, which I'll say it now before the angry tweets come in or the angry emails, you can also overclock a 2060. But how did the 1660 respond, the 1660 Ti, how did it respond to overclocking?
Well, for me, it was a tale of two cards, and I've got them right here. The card that I did most of the benchmarking with was the card I got first. It's this MSI. It's the Gaming X. So this is already a factory overclocked card, and it's got a pretty big cooler on it for a smaller GPU like this. The new GPU, this TU116, is significantly smaller than the GPU that's in the 2060. It's gone from 445 millimeters squared down to 284 millimeters squared. It has only 120 watt TDP, but even so, all the board partners are using an 8-pin power connector, which would, in theory, give you a lot of overclocking headroom. The EVGA card, the smaller card, well, I say smaller, but if you're watching the video, this is a triple slot design. This is a massive little, like 170, 175 millimeter card. But EVGA opted with this particular one, this XC Black, which is kind of their stock clocked variety of card, to just go with a 100% power limit. So that manufacturers can pretty much do whatever they want with power limits on this card, from my understanding, but overclocking is going to be very dependent on what you can set that power limit to. So the MSI card, which I did most of my primary testing with, I overclocked both of them, but the MSI card has a 107% power limit, pretty modest, but just turning up the power limit and doing nothing else with sufficient cooling gets you an automatic overclock. Turning up the fan speed a little bit. These GPUs are extremely thermally constrained, and that's not to say that they get hot. It's just that as the GPU boost algorithm kind of works, it's looking at thermals first. And so if it has plenty of thermal headroom, it'll keep on clocking up and clocking up. So that's one way that EVGA, without increasing the power limit on the small card, could give you some pretty high clocks just because the cooler is so massive. And what I found with overclocking results was significant improvement with very little effort. So turn up the board power limit. I was able to get an increase in the core clock on both cards of around 120 to 130 megahertz. I think 135 actually, because he's moving 15 megahertz increments. And that translated into sustained boost clocks for the small card of about 1985 megahertz, close to 2 gigahertz, depending on the load duration and that sort of thing, to with the bigger card, well over 2 gigahertz, like 2070 megahertz or more. So similar clocks actually to what I saw from the RTX 2060 when I overclocked that card. So it seems like Turing has no trouble hitting 2 gigahertz and keeping it there as long as you are able to thermally control the core. So excellent gains, not like huge jumps. I got bigger jumps overclocking the RTX 2060, but I had a bigger power window there. I think it was 114% or something with that one. So if we see a 1660 Ti with a really aggressive power delivery window, like if you can go up to like 120% or something, you could easily reach RTX 2060 levels with this card, I think.
That would be nice. I somehow feel like the card manufacturers may feel they may either be extracting a premium on those cards when you buy one, or NVIDIA will extract a premium from them. For the most part, it seems like it's all thumbs up for this series.
Yeah, and I will say, just from kind of my concluding thoughts of this card and the RTX 2060 before it, the performance level, the pricing based on the performance level, it all is pretty logical and it's fair, but that's not really exciting. Like, we want really, really fast and really, really cheap, and they're not under any pressure here. So it's just like, well, actually based on our current product stack and what we've offered in the past, here's a decent improvement, and it's a little bit less money than the last one was. So is that enough to entice somebody to upgrade? That depends. I mean, you can look at the charts and the reviews and see exactly where it sits relative to the other cards, but there will be a moot point once the GTX 10 series disappears from the retail chain. And these are very good replacements. Like the RTX 2060 was a very good replacement for the GTX 1070 Ti, which was, not as common a product as the 1070 was, which was like a $449 card. And this This is more than an adequate replacement for the 1060, and in fact replaces the 1070 as far as the overall GPU performance. So, the pricing for the 2060 and now this 1660 Ti are $100 less than their equivalent Pascal predecessors as far as performance goes. So that's great, but that's kind of what I would have expected almost 2 years later too. So logical.
You're underwhelmed.
May not be sexy, but it's logical. Yeah, it's a little underwhelming, but I mean it's not disappointing. It's just this performance is where it should be.
I feel if you've been holding off for a long time and then you got through the RTX announcements, but the RTX 2060 was too expensive. There may be, a 1660 without the TI in the pipeline, but this is a really good card for the money. And I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I mean, if you want to run 1080p and ultra settings all day, you don't have a monitor upgrade plan, this is pretty badass. It'll do decent 1440p gaming. If you already have a 1440p monitor, I think the consensus is kind of go for a 2060. But it seems like it's a really safe time to buy a GPU. ... Q AMD releasing some wonder card next week that nobody expected.
Please no. Please no. I need a week off.
I want to see my family, says Sebastian. I only see my child by the light benchmarks.
Yeah, and actually that's far closer to the truth than you may know. It is a fact that RGB powered benchmarking workstations have been in the family room and have lit up the room at night while watching my son. So
we have a bunch of exciting stories to talk about, including the update to one of the great CPU coolers of all time. And I'm actually entirely too excited about this because I get excited about things like this. But let's take a moment to thank our sponsor. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware brought to you by Helm. Helm believes you should control your data, right? It's kind of a crazy concept in this day and age. They believe you have the right to live in your own terms, including online, which is why they've created a personal server that allows you to easily own and manage your online identity, starting with your email, your calendars, and your contacts. You ever feel squeamish that, that certain company with a lot of G's in its name knows everything about you and what you do? Do you know where your email is stored? Most critical data, emails, contacts, calendar details, all that good stuff, stored on massive corporate servers outside your home. They leave you vulnerable to hacks and surveillance. Now, connect Helm to your home network. You're going to gain uncompromising personal data privacy and security. They're serious about this. They want you to feel safe and secure online wherever you are in the world, knowing that your data is no longer just floating in the clouds. Do you ever get a little squeamish about that? Like, my data is out there somewhere. Right now, your data can be right where it should be with you. You can communicate with confidence, you're free from the threat of hacking. Helm gives you a really secure system, and it's super easy to set up. It's super simple to manage. You can get it running up in like less than 5 minutes. You can access it anywhere in the world. They're including DMARC, SPF, DKIM, but 128 gigabytes of solid-state storage, so it's fast. And they're really serious about keeping it secure. Because you might be thinking, but if the server's in my house, what if it gets stolen? Well, it's got full disk encryption with keys managed by a secure enclave. It's secure boot. They have server-to-server encryption over TLS with certificates from Let's Encrypt. Proximity-based two-factor authentication through the Helm app so people can't do weird things with strange phones. Helm is private by default, and they design it with a VPN tunnel and encrypted offsite backups that are only accessible to you with a unique private security key. And Helm offers free shipping, a 1-year warranty, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Privacy is a right, not a setting, people. Protect what matters with Helm. For a limited time, save $50 off the Helm personal server by visiting thehelm.com/twitch. But don't wait. This offer is only valid for a limited time. That's thehelm.com/TWICH. And we want to thank Helm for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. They worked really hard to secure that thing. It's actually kind of impressive. Also impressive, the legendary, the Cooler Master Hyper 212, which I guess is the 212 if you want to read it the long way. The whole idea of updating this seems so strange because it's such a classic. It's one of like 2 or 3 coolers that kind of said, you don't have to spend a lot of money to keep your processor cool unless you're an insane overclocker. What's going on with this one?
Well, like you said, I mean, the 212 Evo, if you've shopped for a cooler in the last, I don't know, 5 years, it's been probably #1 on Amazon for as long as I can remember. It's just the go-to aftermarket cooler for just about everyone, and it works with almost every platform. They've updated it over time to encompass newer CPU sockets. The version of it that I bought, it works with like the 2011 socket and all the Intel and AMD sockets. So and as good as it is, and as cheap as it is for its high performance level, we're talking the $30 to $35 range.
Right.
It was not a perfect product. It got the job done, and people lived with things like its sort of idiosyncratic mounting system, which involves if anybody knows this cooler, they know the X-shaped sort of spring-loaded thing that you have to sort of compress and snake through the heat pipes and then open it again, and it has to be on the right side because there's a little knob, and you have to like line it up, and you have to pull it back out if you didn't get it right. Anyway, once you got it mounted, well, it's the way it worked, and once you got it mounted, the performance was fantastic, and you couldn't really argue. But the update,
every cooler should have a reverse Hassenpfeffer load.
The update, it basically takes it to the next level in every way. It's a cosmetic improvement. If it's a performance improvement, as we'll discover, and the mounting mechanism has been completely changed and is now on a par with something that you would expect to see from like Noctua, where now the bottom has these dedicated brackets that you select whether you want the AMD or the Intel style. You attach them to the base with screws. So now you have this solid all metal foundation, which very securely mounts on 4 points. You're not using a separate piece like the brace that they used with the original design that only had actually 1 point of contact in the very center of the block. Now this is more down like every other higher end cooler is, and it's got this really sharp, like stealthy kind of appearance with a black nickel coating, no more exposed copper heat pipes. The whole thing looks a lot more expensive than this is, and you can get it with or without an RGB fan. I was sent the one that had an RGB fan. And you can attach this to your RGB header on your motherboard. And if you don't have one of those, it came with a little control. That's how actually I tested it. That lets you just connect it to a Molex power connector from your power supply, and then use a little remote to switch through the different colors and that sort of thing. But completely optional, of course. And once this thing was mounted, and I brought out the old 212 again and did fresh testing just so I could have a true A to B comparison on the test platform. And this was about a degree cooler with exactly the same thermal compound, same CPU. And I attribute that to just a little bit more secure of contact against the CPU from the new mounting system. But the sound, the actual noise output is so much lower from this. Under load, we're talking about the same noise output as one of those Intel stock coolers, which are pretty quiet, 38.5 decibels. And the Hyper 212 Evo, as great as it is, has always been a little bit louder under load, around 45 decibels. And this is about the same 2,000 RPM limit on the fan. It's plus or minus 10% from the PWM fan, but going at about 1,920 or so RPM under load, 38.5 decibels. You're not going to hear this in a case, and you're not going to hear it over pretty much any GPU. So it's, and the most amazing thing to me was like, oh, it has this nice plate on the top, and it's got the black nickel finish, and they're offering it with an RGB fan. It's going to be really expensive now. And no, like when I looked before publishing the review, it was $35 on Amazon. So we're talking about the same price range, that $30 to $35 price range, and just a refinement in every way and much quieter. So whether you get the one with the plain black fan or the RGB fan, it's just a win. Like I said, they knocked it out of the park with this one. It's everything that a product upgrade should be. Like it's actually exciting. We're talking about a $35 cooler, but it is exciting. And I think this sets the standard for that budget cooler for a long time, just like the 212 Evo did, where that was the cooler. Like if you bought a processor that didn't come with one, like Intel since the 6th gen hasn't been shipping coolers with any of their unlocked processors, and
Right.
Intel, AMD actually has some decent stock cooling, but this kind of takes it to the next level. There's not really anything that this can't cool. I mean, you wouldn't put this on a Threadripper system, but it doesn't offer that compatibility. But for desktop users, this is great.
I mean, I got to say, just looking at the fact that they finally, my one challenge with the Cooler Master, the 212 Evo, the original one, was bending fins during installation, and to see the way they've covered the top of that, which one, of course, is much more aesthetic, and two is going to make it that much harder to schwack the fins. It's the fan design looks interesting. I'm excited. People are probably kind of staring, being like, "Why are you excited about a cooler?" But when this came out, right? It used to be like, okay, there were $60, $70, $80 coolers that were competitive with low-end water coolers, and all of a sudden we had this like no brain. It's $35. You're going to have to spend close to $150, $200 plus, like $150 plus on a liquid cooling system to do something that will give you more cooling. Except unless you were doing pretty serious overclocking, you didn't need it. So it's kind of cool to see them update this. And the originals are down on sale for like $30. So
yeah, still a great cooler, but I would absolutely spend the extra $5 and get this one, if only for the mounting system. Plus, I didn't mention this, the durability, I think, long-term is going to be better. My 212 Evo I bought and only have benchmarked it a few times. It was never in constant use, but just from clipping and unclipping the fan, the fan clips didn't really hold up. One of them cracked pretty easily. This one has much thicker plastic clips for the fans. The black fan version actually uses a metal clip system, so that should be a little bit better. But I think they looked at it and just kind of said, let's improve the mounting system, let's improve the fan, let's improve the aesthetics, and they did all of that, and they didn't charge a lot for it. And Cooler Master obviously knows what they're doing. I mean,
right.
I spotted this while you were talking. It's like, if you look back to the Socket 7 era, they've been doing cooling fans since at least the early 90s, and hey, this is a ball bearing. Okay, this is a quiet one.
So you just hear the whooshing air. And look at that RGB, kids. That's the real reason they updated it, so they wouldn't lose sales to RGB coolers.
Plus, the sort of stealthy black looking cooler, that's kind of like the Be Quiet vibe from their line, the Dark Rock series, and I'm seeing more coolers now kind of like, hey, let's go with a darker color scheme. Like Noctua came out with a darker color scheme after, being stalwarts for the bare aluminum fin plus, brown and tan fans for a long time. So
the remote control cracks me up to no end.
Yeah.
That just amuses me. How do you feel, to shift gears in a dramatic and peculiar direction, how are you feeling about the foldable phone situation, right? Mobile World Congress, Huawei showed off their dual screen phone to a lot of people excited, a lot of people kind of weirded out about it because of the way it folds versus Samsung's. Motorola went out of their way to say, hey, we're not going to be left behind, people. We got one of these foldable phones coming. TCL, the television company, led a few reporters to see some of their prototypes, wouldn't let anybody actually take any pictures of them. But they claim they're going for something completely different from Huawei or Samsung. And of course, Samsung and Huawei are throwing shade at each other, back and forth and back and forth about, the Galaxy folks are like, oh, they put the screen on the outside, it's going to look like crap. And the Huawei folks are like, oh, we did a design like theirs, but we decided we could do better and we threw it out. And, having dual screens is just silly. They're all going to be at this point, TCL, I think, is talking about something in the $500-$600 range. I think I read in one place. Motorola, no real comment other than we're there along with everybody else. Xiaomi had a video of their folding phone. But so far, we're talking about sort of super 2X flagship phones that fold into giant pocket squares.
Yeah,
like you know. Are you feeling any love for these, or does this feel like an industry that's desperate to get people to start buying expensive phones again? Because part of me thinks it's got potential. Okay.
Yeah.
You're not buying into
that. Cool. It's cool, but it's so expensive. Right. I think this Huawei phone is what, like, am I wrong? Was it like $2,600 US was the pricing?
Bracingly expensive.
Yeah, they've managed to do it. They've made a folding phone more expensive than Samsung, and I'm proud of them for doing that. And somebody had to step up and say $1,980 is not enough. How about, more than $2,500? Although I could be wrong about the pricing. I'm not seeing it in this PGR article, but it's a beautiful looking screen.
Yeah. But I'm hearing Tim Cook's voice, hold my Shiraz, as he stands up and gracefully walks over to the lab table to pick up the $3,000 folding Apple Superphone. No, actually, it's a really interesting design, because stop right there. If you're watching the video right now, you see how one side of it kind of clips into the other side. It folds over like an envelope or a wallet, and the screen, what little you can see is good. You can see a ripple in the center of that screen that is on the video right now, and that's the part I'm really curious about, because polymers have a funny habit of stretching over time, and I'm very curious to see what that hump and on the Galaxy phone also, as you open it and close it and open it and close it and open it and close it and open it and close it several thousand times over the life of the product, what's it going to look like? At day 30, at day 100, at day 1000. I'm really curious about that. I don't think either one of us are going to sell a car so we can buy a bleeding edge phone that may or may not be functioning in 18 months and will be fundamentally impossible to replace the screen on. I suspect, the screen availability on these is going to be kind of slight. Like the iFixit teardowns on these should be hysterical.
I can just predict now a score of like 1 for repairability, because it's probably like it's held together with glue and hope, and the durability concerns I think are very legitimate. And what happens if first of all, how are you going to put a case on one of these? So if you're going around without a case, God forbid you drop it, because I don't even want to know what the replacement cost would be. I think when the Galaxy S8 Plus came out, the screen replacement was a very high percentage of the total cost of the phone. So for people who dropped them and broke the screen, at least in the early days, it dropped to the point where it was around $300 or so. But, you drop your $800 phone, you're having a bad day. I don't want to drop a $2,000 phone. And but on the other hand, I will say, like, I have not felt like I meant something when I was out in public the way that I did when I had the first generation iPhone. When people would walk up to me and say, "Oh, is that the iPhone?" Like that summer of 2007, and I was a big deal because I had the iPhone. And now I'm just a regular person and nobody cares. But what if I got the folding phone? I could be a big deal again. I could be walking around and unfolding this 8-inch thing in the checkout lane at the grocery store, and it's a status symbol.
You could also start wearing stripper glitter all over your face, or dye your hair purple, or dye your hair pink or green, or start wearing nothing but, assless chaps and carry around a bullwhip and probably get just as much attention.
But none of those things cost $2,000, Patrick. I think you're missing the point.
Depends on the glitter, depends on the chaps, buddy.
It's true. I guess there's designer jeans out there that are pretty pretty expensive, even without the material. Like, you're talking about a gene that should be less because there's just less of it.
That's the theory. It's the theory. AMD says all new Radeon software releases will support AMD Ryzen APUs. This sounds positive. Anything that makes it easier to get software updates for your hardware is a positive. They certainly seem to want to make sure that all of the laptop owners and all of the APU owners can actually get the latest hardware without waiting on a hardware manufacturer.
And even waiting on AMD themselves, because when they don't call them APUs anymore, but when the Ryzen processors with the Radeon graphics came out, a couple of the really popular models that are out there are the 2200G and the 2400G, which is like $100 to $150 or $60 processors with pretty decent built-in graphics that will certainly do you better in gaming than something from Intel, like the Intel HD graphics. But you were waiting on special driver releases for those particular products. I put together a system for someone last year and was thinking, just download the latest Radeon graphics drivers for them. And it wouldn't install, like no product detected. And I realized, I have to find the special, 2200, 2400G driver. And it was always behind. And now, starting with this release, anytime they update the drivers, day zero releases for new games and optimizations and that sort of thing, you're going to get it, which is why they're showing these performance gains versus what they're calling launch drivers. Like the original versions that came out with these, like the mobile part is what they're showing, the Ryzen 5 Mobile 2500U. But there are people who are probably still on those launch drivers because they haven't sought out a way to get that new, either from the OEM or from AMD, from their special dedicated pages for these products. And now it's just going to be a universal thing. Like, just be on the latest version, get free performance, get the optimizations that you've been missing out on. So it's very positive for consumers.
It's the way it should be.
It's the way it always should have been.
Yeah, that's true.
But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes people, and I hope they've shored up the driver team. And it looks like, the releases are coming a lot faster. That's for sure. Like, we've had multiple graphics driver releases since the Radeon 7 launched, and that was just the beginning of this month. So,
thank goodness. I know it's. I don't want to sound snarky, but it has been interesting dealing with certain laptops or certain all-in-ones where availability of drivers was a train wreck, and I find it super frustrating. I mean, and that's been an issue with Android, for most Android phone models for a while, and I think about that a lot. Although, fortunately, my G6, which has just been outdated by the Motorola G7s that shipped, I think, this week. They are doing a lot better than they were around the G4 eras, where they were like, yeah, you can't really access that micro SD card you bought for storage, but we'll fix that. And then a week later, it was fixed. And then 9 weeks later, the fix finally came through from AT&T. And man, that's one of the advantages of the larger hardware manufacturers, that they are usually on top of drivers. But when they're not, it's super frustrating. So, yay, AMD. And I also think AMD is kind of thinking long-term about their brand and making sure that people have positive associations with it, which is also really smart. And I wish more vendors would emulate that. But that is my personal madness. I just want hardware to work, and I want it to work well. And with gaming, it's just critical. This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by Hover. Building your online brand has never been more important. And I got to say, the uglier certain social media sites get, the crazier they get. Buying a domain name for your passion never seems more important. It's like the first and biggest step to building your personal brand online, because a URL, it's there. You don't have to worry about craze, changing, shifty weirdness from some gigantic billionaire's toy. Keeping your domain name separate from your hosting, by the way, that also gives you the flexibility to choose the right platform for your business. This web service doesn't work. You can go to that web service, and you don't have to deal with them making it complicated, because they also have your URL, right? Your domain name. Nobody wants to be stuck with a solution that doesn't meet their needs. I myself am very happy to have my URL, my domain name separate from my hosting. Hover is amazing. They have over 400 domain extensions to choose from. The one we really like lately, .me. This is a really cool top-level domain. .me. It's a unique extension to use for your portfolio to showcase who you are and what you do. If you've got a portfolio website ready to launch, get yourself the .me extension. It stands out. Hover stands out, too. They got the best-in-class customer support team. They got no upsells. Imagine buying a domain name without having 373 attempts to get you to buy one more thing. Oh, clean and simple user experience. The interface is nice. Personalized email that matches your domain to further support your online identity. And the Hover Connect feature allows you to connect your domain name to many website builders with a few simple clicks. I like Hover. It makes everything easy and simple, and it doesn't cost that much. This year, find a domain name for your passion. Visit hover.com/twit to get 10% off your first purchase of any domain extension for the entire first year. That's hover.com/TWIT for 10% off your domain extension for a full year. And we want to thank Hover for their support. Yay! I like having my own domain name. It makes things simpler. It really does. We were talking about USB 3.2. We're emailing about USB 3.2 earlier because Mark Hochman over at PC World did a wonderful write-up. USB 3.2's horrible new branding scheme may create confusion for PC buyers. Quotes, it's hard to believe that USB branding has become more confusing, but it has. So if you've been dealing with USB-C, USB 3.1, Thunderbolt, some of the exciting things about getting your monitor to run, or will it run, or, oh, wait, this port is the power USB-C port, but that port on the other side of the laptop does the display link monitor over USB. It's frustrating, right? Because right now we got USB 2.0, USB 3.0, USB 3.1, Gen 1, Gen 2, 3.2 is coming out. And as Mark notes, right, this is awesome. If you click over to the USB 3.2 specification, which also includes the language uses guidelines, this is pretty funny. But what we're talking about here,
yes,
USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 is going to deliver 20 gigabits per second, right? That's the theoretical maximum. USB 3.2 Gen 1 at 5 gigabits per second, and USB 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabits per second. And it's kind of funny because you get into this, there's a marketing name, SuperSpeed USB, SuperSpeed USB 10 gigabits per second, and SuperSpeed USB 20 gigabits per second, which sounds easy enough, except that there have been a whole lot of USB specification writings about SuperSpeed Plus, Enhanced SuperSpeed, and SuperSpeed with a plus sign, but those aren't to be used.
Yeah, the messaging for this, from their new specification, language usage guidelines from the USB IF, is it's comical. It's like they took everything and just threw it together into one document that seems to contradict itself at times. Like you were talking about the super speed thing. I'll pull one of these quotes. Super speed plus, enhanced super speed, and super speed plus are defined in the USB specifications. However, these terms are not intended to be used in product names, messaging, packaging, or any other consumer-facing content.
Right.
What?
It's really weird.
The transfer rates, the actual physical characteristics of the product names and marketing materials are separate from the protocols, from the performance capabilities. They've taken what was a mess where you had, for some reason, they're attached to USB 3.0. I'm not sure what it is, or 3 point something. We went from USB to, I guess there was 1.1, but then we went to 2.0, and then we went to 3.0, which was, another big jump from 2.0. But now we've just been on iterations of 3 for years, and they don't want to adopt USB 4.0. I don't know why. You would have thought that when the Type-C connector hit and the newer generations that allowed for greater throughput, you would have gone to USB 4.0, but they did not. And then the difference is not only in speed, the actual throughput, but in the charging capabilities, like you were alluding to. Like it's whether it provides like the higher power delivery or for battery charging, that's all separate. And you have to look at the logo and and you're looking at if you have a laptop, one side of it says this has the super speed logo, but does it have the little battery icon? And for the longest time, you could tell USB ports from each other by looking at the color. Like USB 3.0 came out and they were all blue internally. And you could tell a USB 2.0 from a 3.0 port because, the one 3.0 port on my computer is blue. And then
so I should plug it into that one.
Right. But now it's, we have 3.1 Gen 1 on this one. It looks like 3.0, but then the 3.1 Gen 2 is black.
No, because it gets crazy, right? Because they're naming and their packaging recommendations. So picture yourself. It's like 8:55. Best Buy closes at 9 o'clock. You have a new widget. You bought it there because you couldn't wait, however many days for Amazon to deliver it to you, 24 or 48 hours. And you're looking at the cable rack. And it's like, okay, so the recommended nomenclature, and I hate to see the word nomenclature outside of like rifle manuals and, industrial manuals, but the nomenclature for this, for the box is super speed USB. That's for the 5 gigabit per second products. Super speed USB 10 gigabit per second, and super speed USB 20 gigabit per second for 20 gigabyte products. But they are all at least backwards compatible. So if you pay for a 20 gigabit per second cable, you can still use it presumably for 5 gigabit per second products. But it's ugly because the other thing they're talking about is the USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, but they don't seem to want you to call it USB 3.2. I mean, it's messy. And it adds layers of cruft on top of the existing issues, right? Because one of the things they say, and I appreciate their attempts to clear this, is the implementers forum is reminding everyone that this is not USB Type-C, that this is not power charging, that it is not power delivery. It's oh goodness. Yeah.
3.1 seemed like a stretch to me. And I guess it was, well, we're using the same connector, but we offer greater throughput and greater enhanced charging capability. And then that wasn't consistent because there were different iterations of what we would have considered 3.1, obviously. Right. And they've replaced it with this 3.2, which somehow they thought was going to make things less confusing. But I really wish they would just come out with a USB 4 and just put this all to bed.
Maybe they have some massive architectural change in vision before they jump to 4.0. But the upside is, I spent a lot of time joking going into CES that one of the big goals this year is to be to talk to Netgear, to talk to Linksys, to talk to various other manufacturers, be like, so are you going to call it 802.11 AC, or is it going to be Wi-Fi 5? Are you doing the next generation stuff, or are you calling that Wi-Fi 6? And everybody seemed to be down with the Wi-Fi 6, but then they made sure to mention the actual sort of IEEE spec for that, or the 802.11 spec for that everywhere. And it seems as soon as we get something a little less foggy in one area, they fog it up in another area. And the best part of this is we've probably got a year plus before we see anything with any of these parts on it in terms of motherboards or anywhere else. So they have plenty of time to figure out more complicated, less complicated names. It's just really? Faster is good. Yeah, because USB-C versus USB still seems to be a bit of a mess for a lot of people.
Yeah.
More cheerful notes. Samsung begins mass production of 512 gigabyte embedded universal flash storage, or EUFS for 3.0, EUFS 3.0 for universal flash storage for smartphones with speeds of up to 2100 megabytes per second. This, not that I do anything on a phone that requires that kind of speed, but as somebody who has a 400 gigabyte micro SD card stuffed into his phone right now, that's pretty crazy. Samsung's calling it the industry first. A nice write-up on Engadget. Samsung's calling it the industry's first 512 gigabyte smartphone chip, and in line with embedded universal flash storage, which is probably a really narrow bucket to be comparing yourself in. I just like the idea of stupid fast, stupid large storage. Because if you're going to pay $2,000 for a phone you're afraid to take out of your pocket or the case, at least it should be able to carry everything you could possibly want inside of it. I'm also really curious what it's going to do in terms of performance, because they're talking about in terms of raw storage performance, they're talking 20 times faster than micro SD and 4 times faster than a regular SATA solid state drive. So that's really fast.
Yeah, and smartphone storage, like eMMC type storage, is notoriously slow and is actually a bottleneck for performance in some instances. And those who've tested storage performance on Android phones in the past can attest to that. But this looks like a breath of fresh air as far as internal storage for a smartphone. We've seen other things at MWC, like SanDisk was showing off their huge 1 terabyte micro SD card. And that's interesting, but I mean, it was only up to 160 megabytes per second. Still very, very good, very high speed SD flash. But I sincerely hope that something like this new Samsung product supplants the old eMMC standard that we see in embedded devices and like mini PCs, and smartphones, and tablets, because it is just painfully slow.
The only redeeming factor of the eMMC is it seems to be faster than bad micro SD.
Oh, okay. I'll give you that.
Oh my goodness! So they're supposed to launch it this month, along with a 128 gigabyte version, and then a 1 terabyte and 256 gigabyte model later this year, according to Engadget. Yeah, I love the idea of having storage that fast. I would like storage that fast inside of more laptops, frankly, but I don't think it's going to happen, at least not at a spectacular price. I saw a story. I wanted to mention this because you open up NVIDIA's site, and I want to see if that giant flag is still up at NVIDIA.com. Okay, so the first thing you see on NVIDIA.com, don't miss the Premier AI conference, and the second thing on the carousel, the 1660 Ti. They had a gigantic sort of like, we are the AI company of the future, and I was kind of thinking about that because a lot of what we think about with AI is either incomprehensible stuff involving photography on phones. But I thought it was interesting because Google and DeepMind, they're using artificial intelligence and they're applying it to analyzing what's going on with wind farms, how much power they're producing, and predicting it 36 hours out. And they're claiming that by doing this, they're kind of boosting the value of that energy by about 20%. And that may or may not be a picture of Livermore, which is not too far from where I'm sitting right now. It looks a lot like that. But no, I guess that's in the central United States. But they used a neural network. They threw it at weather forecast, historical turbine data, and they seem to be getting decent results looking, projecting what's going to come out of the windmills 36 hours in advance. And then they can commit to how much energy they can deliver to the power grid a day in advance. And because they can schedule the delivery of that power, they can actually get a premium price on that. So, they are not 100%, but it's much better than randomly guessing. I thought that was really interesting because we hear a lot about AI, but we rarely hear about AI in a way that I think, to me, makes a lot of concrete sense, or like, oh my goodness, the AI is doing something cool. Or maybe I'm just underwhelmed by a lot of what we read is like massive amounts of marketing fluff, or our AI modules will allow your car to make decisions you're too frightened to in the vehicle of the future eventually, if we ship it and somebody buys it. And the programming works, and the lawyers ever finish. But I thought this was interesting. This is just a very simple kind of concrete example of AI doing something useful. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with that, but But it just seems like we hear about a lot of what's going on in AI, but it always seems so far in advance and so, I don't know, ephemeral, useless,
abstract.
Abstract. I like that.
What if we're like a few years removed from deep learning, like machine learning is predicting the weather, is replacing the need for meteorologists, It's like, well, based on all empirical data ever gathered in the last 3 or 4 centuries of weather reporting, we've just put together a forecast for the next decade, and it will be correct within a tolerance of plus minus 10%.
Well, you know, one of the most uptight people I've ever run into was involved with Watson, and they basically were like, look, AI is going to start replacing jobs everybody thought were safe because they were knowledge workers, and knowledge workers' jobs involve human intelligence, and that's going to be apparently a lot easier to replace than anyone thought. So I've been a little paranoid about that for the last couple of years, because it's not just meteorologists, but you know, there's another link. If you go to DeepMind's website, there's a great kind of short read, AlphaStar Mastering the Real-Time Strategy Game StarCraft 2.
Oh boy.
You know, so basically AlphaStar is their StarCraft 2 playing program. Quote, the first artificial intelligence to defeat a top professional player, end quote. And you know, and beat the individual in question, one of the, quote, world's strongest professional StarCraft players, 5-0. And so on a professional match conditions, on a competitive ladder map without any game restrictions. And, you know, because traditionally StarCraft has been a little more complicated than AI could handle. But it also is interesting that they handcrafted big chunks of the system and kind of figured out how to get the system to work within, sort of restrict the system's choices, I think, within the framework of the game rules. But it's, you know, if you want to start reading about what's going on, it's kind of interesting to dig into this and look at how the agents are trained for this. If you keep scrolling down just a little bit farther, that kind of fascinated me, because they, like, if you look at these, it's just how they're setting up individual chunks of the neural network and what's going on there. And it's, I don't know, it's interesting to me. Because so much of this is, you know, I don't think I will ever be able to, you know, grok at a meaningful level quantum computing, but I think it's kind of fascinating to watch how they are using, you know, training AI to be more intelligent and less peculiar. Fortunately, they still make miserable poetry, so I got that going for me. Plus, the graphs on the DeepMind website are absolutely fantastic. But
they are very
DeepMind. Yeah, they are an Alphabet company, which means they're a Google company. But it's interesting stuff.
You know, the real important application of AI, of course, is writing fake product reviews. That's the future. Writing convincing-looking product reviews for everything. That, you know, I can't think of a better application of it. I don't know where I was reading that, but something about like AI farmed product reviews, and it makes too much sense, because they would do a heck of a lot better job than some of the fake product reviews I read on Amazon, where it looks like English might be a third language, and
I was typing too fast.
The product is so great, the product that I love, that enhances every day.
Yeah. Nothing like a good cut and paste review with a few bad cut and paste iterations in between. In the meantime, if you're worried about artificial intelligence and fake spot isn't doing it for you, just ask us. Tweet at Sebastian Peak or tweet at Patrick Norton. Listen to the podcast. Send us email. Should be twich@twit.tv. We've been getting some of your emails, so feel free to send some more of those out there. Or again, just go on the Twitters and tweet at Sebastian Peak or at Patrick Norton. If this is your first, if this podcast is unfamiliar, it's This Week in Computer Hardware. It's a Twit podcast. And right now, if you're watching the video, that's twit.tv/twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. And we like to talk about computers and hardware and fixing them and making them faster and all sorts of other things. And if you've never been to the podcast before, you've never heard us before, do us a favor, subscribe. All the links are over at twit.tv/twitch, or search for Twitch or This Week in Computer Hardware on your favorite podcatcher. If you haven't been over there, you should also go to pcper.com. That's Sebastian's website. And there are all of the benchmarks on that GTX 1660 Ti, including some really interesting stuff to look at in terms of overclocking that I found kind of fascinating. And if you're looking for more of me, go to techthing.com, tekthing.com. And we're having all sorts of fun with TechThing, in part because people are sending us pictures of their battle stations, which we talked about a bunch this week. Sebastian was on to talk about the GTX 1660 Ti. Shannon's got a review of the Lenovo Legion Y7000P. And generally speaking, we answer viewer questions and talk about hardware and software and how to make it all run just a little bit better. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Sebastian B.
We'll catch you next week on Twitch.